national police forces have been classic devices by which people become dictators. You see, there's usually a particular cabinet level department, usually called the Ministry of the Interior. So you get your fingers on the Ministry of the Interior, you now control the police force, and you take over the government. That's how the Nazis did it.
That's how every third world dictator has a general's outfit.
I'm alarmed by two things here. Number one, I'm alarmed by the expansion of federal police. And the other thing is I'm alarmed by the expansion of federal criminal laws. One of the things you learn when you read the original Constitution book is that when the American people were considering the Constitution, they were reassured repeatedly that the federal government would have almost no criminal jurisdiction.
Is there a growing risk of dictatorship in this country?
Yes, I would say there is, simply because the president has become so powerful. And this is something, John, that's very difficult to explain to people. You'll have folks like those on the left saying, Trump has too much power, he's going to be a dictator, et cetera, et cetera. And you would like them to take away from that the lesson that no one man should have so much power. But they don't take away that lesson at all. What they learn is, let's put in one of our people so he'll have all that power. And until we change that mentality, I'm not sure we'll get the republic back.
Rob Natelson, the author of the original Constitution, one of the best guides to the Constitution. It is remarkable what you know. Let me bring it to today. The idea of the Constitution was that these guys who wrote it did not trust the king. They did not trust centralized power. They knew how, they understood power corrupts. So they come up with this great system of breaking it up into three pieces, and those three pieces have to keep an eye on one another. So nobody can become king, Congress can't become the monarch, the courts can't, and the president can't. Pardon me, but it sure looks like to me that over the last century, Congress keeps building more government. Government has to be run by the executive branch, which is run by one guy. So over the last century, it seems like the power has not been evenly split in thirds, but that one branch keeps throwing more power to the presidency. And now that a lot of people don't like what that president is doing, they're going, this is unconstitutional. And part of me is thinking, why did you jerks keep giving the president more and more power over the last century? How off am I?
Yeah, you're not off at all. The one problem is that Congress assumed so much power. Remember at the beginning of our talk, I said one reason the federal government is so dysfunctional is it's doing all sorts of things it's not supposed to do. So when Congress passes a law like the Law for the Promotion of General Welfare, it has no way of realistically overseeing the implementation of that law, so it hands it over to the executive branch. It then takes another power over, let's say, healthcare or pensions or real estate or whatever, and it can't handle that, so it piles it all over to the executive branch. There are two things going on here, I think, fundamentally. One is the refusal of the U.S. Supreme Court since the 1930s to enforce constitutional limits on Congress. And the second thing is the failure of the states. They're also supposed to be part of this balancing act. The failure of the states to use the state-based amendment process, which was inserted into the Constitution largely to prevent this sort of thing from happening.
So for those who might not be following, you've been perhaps the leading national scholar on the Article 5, and Article 5 which says that, yes, Congress can propose amendments to the Constitution that goes to the states to be ratified, but the states can also propose constitutional amendments.
Yeah.
You're not talking about a constitutional convention but it can say, hey, here the federal government has to have a balanced budget. That would be a great proposal. Or, heaven forbid, federally elected representatives must be term limited like state ones are. These guys are never going to pass that on themselves. The federal Congress will never pass those limitations on themselves, in the same way that the legislature in Colorado would never pass term limits, would never pass open meetings, open records, and of course the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which requires them to ask before they raise taxes. None of those would be passed. We superseded them as with the initiative process. There's something similar, Article 5. Has it ever been used?
The analogy is exactly correct. Just as we have the initiative process, which is designed to correct the legislature, so the founders created this process that's part of Article 5, which is the amendment process. And what it says is that 2/3 of the states may get together, send what are called applications to Congress, and say, we want a meeting, a convention, to propose, let's say, a term limits or a balanced budget amendment. That part of Article 5 has never been used, which is ironic because when the Constitution was being debated among the general public as to whether they wanted to ratify it or not, one of the big selling points that the Federalists, the pro-Constitution guys had was, hey, look, if there's a problem, the states can step in, amend the Constitution, and rein the federal government back in. And yet, over all those years, we've never used it. Imagine, John, if the president never vetoed a law. Let's say the president said, no president ever vetoed a law because it would be, let's say, too politically risky. What would happen to the office of the presidency? It would diminish maybe into a little ministry. That
would turn into King Charles of England, where you sign everything that the
exactly right. So,
Parliament gives you.
Right, because for exactly the same reason, because since 1713, the English king has never vetoed a law. So it would turn into a merely ceremonial office. Well, the same thing has happened because of the failure to use the check in the amendment process that the states have to pull back the federal government. So,
and sooner or later, we are going to have to pull that trigger. You cannot have 125% GDP as your debt.
That's right.
You just can't do that. At some point, the states have to go, you guys are out of control.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's going to take a crisis.
It will take. Yeah. All right, speaking of crisis, I don't know if you've read the papers, but our democracy is in crisis. We have a fascist dictator in office. And, some of the points that folks make, I kind of go, I might agree with you on a couple of these things. I don't like the idea that our president is just making up tariffs. I don't know if he's got the power to do so. I don't like that he's nationalizing corporations, saying, well, we'll take 10% of Intel and 10% of the steel company. I have mixed feelings about him sending troops into cities other than D.C., which is a federally controlled. How much of the stuff, overwhelmingly, is Trump doing that's unconstitutional? Is there anything that you look at what he's done and go, you can't do that?
Let me first put this in perspective. If the accusation is fascism, it's the Biden administration that qualifies far more than the Trump administration.
Explain that.
I've written about this, and it appears on the Independence Institute website, on a whole variety of grounds. Even while complaining or accusing their opponents of being fascists, the Biden administration act like a fascist administration. I say that very advisedly, okay? I've never accused...
Give me a couple examples.
Well, one example is attempting to, by executive order, force 150 million Americans to take into their bodies a medication that they didn't want to take into their bodies. Another example is the war on the First Amendment that the Biden administration waged. The biggest threat, frankly, to the First Amendment in American peacetime history. We had never seen anything like this before, where you have dozens and dozens of administrative personnel regularly leaning on and threatening social media and the press as to what they could or couldn't do. These are extraordinary.
We don't find out afterwards until folks like Zuckerberg say, they're screaming at me, telling me I've got to take this stuff down. And so we throttled dissent on COVID.
And then there was the lawfare. I mean, you recall Nixon got in trouble because he had an enemies list, which never really got implemented. The Biden administration actively weaponize the Justice Department against political opponents. This looks a lot like fascism to me, coupled with the degree of control or interrelationship between the federal government and the national economy.
It is, I hate to use the word entertaining, but to see those with Trump derangement syndrome screaming about Jimmy Kimmel, for instance, that we were using the FCC to pressure a private company. And I go, you're absolutely right. That is so very, very wrong.
But
and we'll
where
stand
were
up.
they?
But where the hell were you?
Yeah.
You know, how can you, and it goes both ways, how can you be angry at that, but you were okay when your guy did it?
Yeah.
In the same way, those of us who are civil libertarians have to stand up and go, Trump, you can't do that. That's not an appropriate use of governmental power. It's nice that now you guys can see it, but it's telling how when Obama did it or Biden did it, they were fine. Trump does it, and they lose their minds.
Yeah, and it's not just one or the other. It's Biden did it by orders of magnitude greater than any peacetime president in American history, as far as I can see. To circle back, as Jen Psaki used to say, to your original question, what is Trump doing that I'm uncomfortable with constitutionally?
Yeah.
You mentioned tariffs. President Trump has been using or imposing tariffs as bargaining chips with other countries, and he's doing that, though, pursuant to a federal law called the International Emergency Powers Act. I don't have the exact wording of it. That law gives virtual carte blanche power to the president to regulate commerce whenever the president declares an emergency. The courts have, two major courts have ruled on this. Both have said that President Trump has exceeded his power under the law. I don't think they're right about that. I think he's probably not exceeded his power under law, but I think that the law is freaking unconstitutional. Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, going back to my original point, that Congress keeps empowering the presidency. It doesn't matter if it's an R or D president. So you're telling me now Congress has given power for the president to declare an emergency and then take all this power. We saw this during COVID. You know, it was a Republican governor and a Republican Congress or state legislature that after 9/11 decided to create all these new emergency powers for future governors to use in case there was a 9/11. Well, we didn't have 9/11. We had this COVID hoax. Not that it was all a hoax, but you know what I mean. It was an overblown emergency. And therefore, the governor could shut down businesses left and right, put people under house arrest, take away their right to peaceably assemble, to go to the houses of worship, and take away their religious rights, because we gave that office the power. In the same way, Trump is enjoying the power that Congress has given him.
In this instance, Congress, once the president declares an emergency, and basically all he has to do to declare an emergency is to sign two pieces of paper. So once he declares an emergency, he is given the power, among many others, to, quote, regulate imports. Now, tariffs are a time-tested way of regulating imports. Prohibitory tariffs, in particular, are authorized by the Commerce Clause. That's part of what regulating commerce meant at the time of the Constitution. Well, how in the world can you constitutionally, if Congress has the power to regulate commerce, simply wholesale transfer that to the president and say you've got the right to regulate imports? That to me is a step too far. So Trump is doing what Congress, I think, authorized him to do, but Congress didn't have the authority to authorize him to do it.
Same thing in this recent budget crisis in Colorado. The legislature doesn't want to make the tough calls of prioritizing.
Kick it to the governor.
So kick a $250 million decision on what to cut to the governor.
Right.
You know, this is a lack of leadership. We elect these guys to do jobs they refuse to do. All right, give me a couple more of what Trump's been doing that bothers you as a constitutional guy.
Let's talk about the deployment of National Guard troops into cities, okay? The U.S. Constitution specifies three different circumstances in which the National Guard can be federalized, that is taken over by the federal government. Because the National Guard is the militia. The term in the Constitution is militia.
And every state, I just want to make every state has a National Guard, which the wording sounds weird because it sounds like it's controlled by the nation. No, it's actually every state has its own little armed force that the national government can call up anytime it wants.
No, well, they can't call it up anytime they want. That's the thing.
Really?
The Constitution specifies 3 circumstances in which Congress may authorize the president to call up or call forth, is the language that the Constitution uses, to call forth the militia. One is in case of invasion. A second is in a case of insurrection. And the third situation is to enforce federal law, not state law, to enforce federal law. And Congress has authorized the president to call forth the militia to enforce federal law when the normal methods of enforcing federal law have proven inadequate. So you've got 2 different cases that recently came out, one from California, one from Oregon. In California, the court determined that President Trump did have authority to call forth the National Guard because the local federal police who protect the federal buildings were overwhelmed. In Oregon, however, the court determined there was no such crisis. And it is beyond the power of the president to simply call up the National Guard to do routine police work, okay? Very often, for example, on Truth Social, President Trump will say something like, Portland is a mess, it is ridden with crime, I'm going to call up the National Guard to protect the people of Portland and also the federal buildings. Well, maybe he can do it to protect the federal buildings if local enforcement is not sufficient, but he cannot do it to protect the people of Portland. That is not a function of the federal government.
What if, and over the last century, we've seen an explosion of federal laws, federal criminal codes. So a lot of things that were done by the states, domestic violence against women, they're now federal laws against domestic violence against women. There are federal laws against murder, even though every state has laws against murder. So now I'm sure there's some on kidnapping, can't he come in and go, well, there's murder in Portland and the locals aren't taking care of it, so we are enforcing the federal law against murder or domestic violence or kidnapping.
One Supreme Court opinion in particular, decided in 1820, reads like he has the authority to do that. But what the courts in recent cases have made clear is that no, he can't bring in federal police or federalize the National Guard to do that kind of police work unless it's demonstrated that what's already on the ground is simply not doing the task.
Does he have the power to bring in the military, not the National Guard, but the United States Army?
The quick answer to that is no, because of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Which does what?
Which basically says that...
And you made up that word, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. The Posse Comitatus Act basically says that that the military will not be used for domestic policing.
Which is, I think, a damn good thing.
Oh, yeah, it's a very good thing.
Well, and because it's 2 different skill sets.
One thing we do not appreciate enough in America is that we do not have a national police force per se. We have individual federal police operations. We have, for example, on Indian reservations or to protect federal buildings. But we don't have a general police force.
We have
an investigation.
Air marshals.
Right.
We have,
But national police forces have been classic devices by which people become dictators. You see, there's usually a particular cabinet-level department, usually called the Ministry of the Interior. So you get your fingers on the Ministry of the Interior. You now control the police force, and you take over the government. That's how the Nazis did it.
That's how every third world dictator has a general's outfit.
I'm alarmed by 2 things here. Number one, I'm alarmed by the expansion of federal police. And the other thing is I'm alarmed by the expansion of federal criminal laws. One of the things you learn when you read the original Constitution book is that when the American people were considering the Constitution, they were reassured repeatedly that the federal government would have almost no criminal jurisdiction. That other than, for example, treason or maybe commercial regulations, that
Piracy, I would imagine.
piracy, yes, but that classic crimes like murder, robbery, burglary would all be handled by the states, except in federal enclaves and territories like D.C. or Guam.
So getting back to this fear that people are having, that our democracy is at risk, and they're focusing in on Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with them that our democracy is at risk, or our republic is at risk. I don't focus in on Trump. I focus in on the creeping nationalization of every part of our lives, from what kind of appliances we can buy, what kind of cars we can drive. And now that the criminal code is so big, they have a right to enforce laws all over. The federal Congress creates these new agencies, and then these agencies make rules. Rules are not laws, but they act just like laws. And so all of a sudden, you change get a new head of the Department of Energy, and he turns off energy and makes it impossible to drill. Wait a second, I thought Congress was empowered with that. No. The EPA is, or this branch. What is the threat level of losing the republic as it was originally founded? There's a doomsday clock for when scientists say, I love it, scientists, say, oh, we're going to have a nuclear war and it's 3 minutes to midnight. How close are we to midnight?
Well, it's no longer the republic that the founders set up. Again, referring back to the original Constitution book, the last chapter deals with this. It's common to say the American Constitution is the longest lived written constitution in history. And in many ways, that's true. We still elect presidents every 4 years, for example. But large parts of the Constitution are gone or have been largely rewritten. The First Amendment, for example, that the Supreme Court applies today is not the First Amendment that the founders wrote. It's a code of laws that were developed by the Supreme Court during the 20th century. It got very little connection to the actual First Amendment.
Can you put a little bit of meat on that, since we're all familiar with the First Amendment?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, for example,
did we lose the First Amendment, or is it just?
It's different now. It's different. During the 1960s, during the 1900s, progressive courts changed the flat rules of the First Amendment into a series of balancing tests. So you can say something that the government doesn't like, and the government can't punish you unless it's necessary for a compelling state interest for the government to punish you.
Right, unless you meet 3 out of these 5 things.
Right. That's right. So
seems so silly, because either we have a right of free speech or we don't.
Or you don't. That's right. And the free speech had certain understood content in the 18th century, and so when they write the First Amendment to say the freedom of speech, they mean something specifically, not concepts that can be balanced away. The other great example is the limits on federal power that are inherent in the Constitution have been largely swept away. The idea that laws are passed by the legislature, as you mentioned a minute ago, has been largely supplanted by government agencies. I never got an opportunity to vote for anybody who decided we're not going to have incandescent light bulbs, right? I never got to vote for such a person, much less vote on the issue. It was kicked to some government agency that decided we're not going to have incandescent light bulbs. Well, wait a minute. This is supposed to be a constitutional democracy. Don't I get a say on that? The answer is no.
Last question. Is there a growing risk of dictatorship in this country?
Yes, I would say there is, simply because the president has become so powerful. And this is something, John, that's very difficult to explain to people. You'll have folks like those on the left saying, Trump has too much power, he's going to be a dictator, et cetera, et cetera. And you would like them to take away from that the lesson that no one man should have so much power. But they don't take away that lesson at all. What they learn is, let's put in one of our people so he'll have all that power. And until we change that mentality, I'm not sure we'll get the republic back.
Do you see a time when it all falls apart? And I'm talking about falls apart.
Yeah, I think we're in a race between the debt situation falling apart or a crack up due to the application of uniform rules on everybody. So between that, on the one side, and on the other side, the international trends toward more decentralization. So eventually, I hope that the international trends toward more decentralization win, that those trends come to the United States and people realize we need to take much of this federal power and push it back down closer to the people.
Maybe they should just read the original Constitution.
That's a good start.
It's a good start.
Yeah.
Where can folks get the 4th edition of the book? It's just such an incredible resource.
Easiest is Amazon. It's dirt cheap. Read it, buy it, enjoy it.
Buy 5 copies, burn 4 of them, and buy 5 more copies. Rob Natelson, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.